Major support for these broadcasts is provided by Bank of America Merrill Lynch and Perfect Building Maintenance, New York Community Bank, Kilroy Architectural Windows, New York's Window Company, Greenberg Traurig, LLP, M&T Bank. Additional support is provided by AVR Realty Company, LLC, All Nation Renovation, Bingham McCutcheon, LLP, Briarwood Organization, Bruce Mosler, Capital One Bank, Cassidy Turley, C.B. Richard Ellis, James Orphanides, Centurion Holdings, Chelsea Lighting, Cushman and Wakefield, Dime Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Douglaston Development, DDG Partners, Hal Fettner, Durst Fettner Residential, Friedman LLP, Accountants and Advisors, Gemini Real Estate Advisors, LLC, Genova, Burns and Gian Tomasi, Investors Bank, Jack Jaffa and Associates, Real Estate Consultants, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Center at Syracuse University, Corman Communities, Madison Realty Capital, Margolin Weiner and Evans, LLP, Certified Public Accountants and Business Advisors, Massey Knackle Realty Services, Meridian Capital Group, Newmark Knight Frank, Site Comply, Sterling and Sterling, SJP Properties, Stonehenge Partners, the Wickoff Group, Urban American, Ackman Ziff Real Estate, Eastern Consolidated, Goldman Properties, the Moynihan Group, Muss Development, RAL Development Services, the Spandrel Group, LLC, Triangle Equities.
I may not be Kreskin. I don't really have the opportunity to determine how the apple is going to be in 2012. Is it going to be ripe or is it going to be sour? So today, in a continuation of my show from last week, I brought together these individuals who provide their insight on how they think 2012 will be. My guests include Joseph Ficalora, who's the president and CEO of New York Community Bank Corp., Lee Nybart, who is the global CEO of Aria Property Partners, Richard Baker, who's the CEO of the Hudson Bay Companies, the oldest retailers in North America.
In the world.
In the world. And last but not least, Jim Kuhn, who is the president at Newmark Knight Frank. And he has another job, which I'm going to ask his opinion in a second. So Jim, besides Newmark Knight Frank, you are a principal in a company called K&G, right? Am I correct?
Well, you're technically correct.
But let me explain. K&G, as we remember, there was a K&G retailer. But K&G that you're involved with relates to a subject that, how 2012. K&G successfully took over the Bethlehem Steel Works and with partners created a casino and now a hotel and I believe retail. So how do you see the environment for gaming in 2012?
First, let me say it's KG Urban, and it's not really active. And I just want my employer to know that I'm devoting full time to my brokerage business, and that my partner, the Las Vegas Sands Company, operates, builds, and maintains the casino. We have nothing to do but collect checks.
Let's get to that subject, because on a show that I did a couple weeks before, and I think this is something appropriate because Richard, your company, Lord & Taylor, is opening up a new store up in the Yonkers market in Ridge Hall, which is very close to the Yonkers racetrack. And now that they've approved, racinos in New York City, the Aqueduct Racino is doing like $1.5 million a day, and they believe that, in the Meadowlands there's going to be other situation, Meadowlands, Monmouth Park, and all the other areas. How do you see the opportunities for the casino and racino business?
First, let me say that we always viewed the business as an adaptive reuse business, not a casino business. Of course, the casino was the anchor or the driving force. When we did Bethlehem, We bought 125 acres with a whole slew of old buildings that Bethlehem Steel Plant used to build tanks and ships for the government. And the business is doing very well. We also have racinos in Vernon Downs and Tioga Downs in upstate New York. Jeff Gorell runs that business, and he's about to do the Meadowlands. So I think that the big question in the casino business is how many casinos is too many casinos, and whether they'll cannibalize each other. I'm sure that if New York State passes casino gambling, will have some impact on Bethlehem. I think that if the Meadowlands gets casino gambling, and there's no indication today that it's going to get it. I mean, nobody's said that they're going to get it, but if it did, it would impact New York. So at some point, there's an amount of disposable income that people are going to go spend at casinos, and if it's not Vegas, it's certainly not Atlantic City, and it's going to be somewhere else.
But you know, my comment, I think, really relates to a lot of, and the reason I brought it up is because it has an effect on every type of retail and consumer spending. You know, you brought it up very aptly that it's going to have an effect on certain aspects of consumer spending. Lee, you know, Aria is an owner of significant amount of hotels. And I mean, you opened up a hotel recently in New Orleans, which is a city where there's a vast
right next door to Harrah's, right?
Right, next to the casino over there. Coupled with you own a lot of hotels around the country over there. Casinos, retail, the hospitality market has really improved the last 2 or 3 years. I mean, if we have to go back into 2007 to 2008, the hospitality market was in major trouble. How do you see the hospitality market for 2012?
It's certainly gotten somewhat better. As we look at our increases in average daily rates, they're certainly starting to increase. The efficiencies of running hotels have also improved dramatically. Hotel managers who we own a hotel management company, have gotten really very good at mobilizing their people, being very efficient, and operating expenses have come way down in hotels. The big problem is corporate America. Are they going to continue on with their conferences, their conventions? Are they going to travel their people? It still is a very, very big unknown in our business. I had breakfast with my partner today to show you how hard it is. Orlando's the home city for this year's NBA All-Star game. And our hotel was the convention center hotel for the NBA All-Star game. Well, guess what? I think it'll be canceled. So you always have these unknowns in the hospitality business, which makes it difficult to forecast. And the other problem is that hotels only run at occupancy rates between 65 and 70%. And you cannot defeat the consumer in charging them higher rates because they always have options.
Joe, I mean, you lend. I know you've done some lending in hospitality. How do you look at the hospitality market?
That's not a market that's generally we lend in. We're pretty consistent. We lend in multifamily, older buildings rather than new buildings. We do commercial too, but we don't do much in the way of hospitality. Very little.
And your reasoning for hospitality?
We don't do house loans. You know, there are certain loans that we believe actually have the capacity to perform through the cycle. We're a cycle lender, so we expect real estate values to go up and to go down. So we actually have decades of performing best during downturning cycles. So we lend in assets that do better in the worst of times.
Michael, aren't you also once again discussed last week about the difference between street retail and shopping centers? You're talking about hotels today. Aren't you also differentiating between hotels in vibrant markets like New York and Washington versus hotels or convention hotels? I mean, the Gansevoort on Park Avenue South is doing close to 90% occupancy. There are a lot of hotels in New York that have attracted young people. The W brand in South Beach today is different than a W somewhere else. So I think that in places like Miami and Los Angeles and New York City, I think that people are finding new creative types of hotels. Branding is sort of the big thing.
But
Well, wait, just to expand on that and what you're both saying is very interesting. A lot of it has to go to who's the better operator, who's smarter. Putting on the right brand in the right location and having the right kind of service is something you can do in a hotel business or you can do in a retail business. When you're talking about a commercial office building, you're a little bit of a victim. You're subject to the world. I mean, you could have a beautiful lobby and you can have good common area maintenance control over your expenses, but you're a victim to whatever the world happens. There are operators, restaurants, hotels, retailers who can control their own destiny.
But isn't also location?
Depending on the business. If
I
you
mean,
have the right brand hotel and it's on a corner.
You know what? If we're talking about, I think, when you talk about the borough of Manhattan, that's a different case. How many successful hotels are going to be in Long Island City? They've built 14 hotels in Long Island City. They built 7 hotels in downtown Brooklyn. The fall off is great when there's a lot of business, but when business drops down, the suburban hotels really don't get that.
The better operators will win in those smaller markets.
How do you see, each year, in your investment cycle, you have to make a determination of what you think is going to be the next winner. The same way that you, as you discussed last week on the show, that you decided that Lord & Taylor outlet stores and Lord & Taylor home was something for 2011. How do you make the determination of what assets you want to buy for your investors from all over the world?
You have to make determinations about where you see business. Most of my adult life has been in the office building business. And when it's good, it's the best. But our partnership approach is that outside of the 4 major cities that we're not going to invest in office buildings because we believe that the forecast of the capital needed to keep them leased is something that we have no control over, and it's much too much of a gamble for us. So we're being conservative. We are looking at industrial and buying it. We're looking at multifamily and buying it. And those are the 2 asset classes that we feel that we can best control the amounts of monies that are needed for it.
Okay.
And last, we just think that the ability to produce new industrial and in most markets new multifamily is still very limited because the amounts of monies that are available on construction loans still are far too little in order to make new construction.
I wanted to get back to New York office, and Lee made a point I want to expand on about corporations not wanting to spend their capital. So even in New York City, where I think we have the best office market in the world today, you have some interesting factors going on in trying to predict 2012. Basically, up until now, if you needed 100 to 200,000 feet, and it's still true today, it's becoming very difficult because the firms that wanted to expand in 08 and 09 who put it on hold went about their move and expansion or restructuring their leases, and they have taken up a lot of the space, and it's very hard to find a good block of space in that range. The Class A space in the Uptown Plaza District type markets, the built space is also very good. But the commodity space, the 10, 20,000 foot pieces of space in B buildings that are not built out are not doing as well. And then you look at, you have 4 major projects on the drawing board. You have Hudson Yards, you have the Brookfield project, you have Larry Silverstein's 2 buildings going up, and you have One World Trade Center. All 4 of those buildings, I don't believe, will be able to be rented up. I don't think there's enough large tenants for all 4. So some of them are going to be successful and some of them won't get built. So when you look out in the horizon of 2012 today, although I don't see a lot of downside to the market, the question is going to be where the next tenants will come. if UBS has put their investment banking business basically on hold or going to get rid of it, if Citibank cannot afford to really restructure, now you look out at firms like Time Warner, who have a $4.5 million plethora of space, and they're going to go somewhere, right? So the vacancy rate is 8%, but the availability rate, when these tenants move, the space they moved out of will be also vacant. So it's very difficult to predict the office markets in 2012 and 2013. I think long term they'll be fine.
We omitted one subject last week and this week. We do still have, and Lee did bring it out, you have a crisis in Europe. This crisis in Europe hasn't been resolved. You have Greece, you have Italy, you have potentially France, you have Spain. What effect is this going to have on the global markets and our market in the U.S. and banking and business and everything? How do you look at this?
The magnitude of uncertainty is unprecedented. There are so many different ways in which a momentum slide could occur, and they feed on themselves. There's no question that almost every single day people are looking for today's excuse for panic, and lo and behold, they will build. So the period ahead has so many governmental issues, so many banking issues, so many reasons why there's going to be uncertainty, instability, fear, consequence,
Volatility.
And that is not a good thing for anyone, ultimately. And the magnitude, if it builds upon itself, it can take us to a place which is at least as ugly as any place we've been in the last few years, and that's not a good statement. To talk about the possibility of things being as bad as they've been in recent past is not a good thing.
Now, another interesting time, ARIA, which was previously called Apollo Real Estate Advisors, had its initial beginnings in the early 90s, a time then we had crisis in the financial markets. Now, right now, Lee Nybard could buy properties and get a good return because his interest rates are rather low. Richard could be building and operating. What happens with all this debt that comes due over the next couple of years? Everything is very sweet over there, but there hasn't been the return of the CMBS market. It was moving very well in 2011, and then it dropped dead. Credit Suisse fired their people. The markets are quiet. What happens when this distressed debt comes due next year? Will banks pretend and extend? In the 90s, Mr. Nybard was able to, and you were beneficiaries of able to get deals. You were able to buy notes.
Michael,
there's no RTC today.
That's because this administration and the last administration determined they weren't going to force banks to mark the market, and it sustained this problem in this systemic area longer than in 1990 when the RTC came in and just closed the banks, protected the depositors, and reopened them on Monday. So you have a situation today where if you're a CMBS lender, the volatility that's going to be caused by the crisis in Europe until, and I say until because I believe the ECB will step in after Italy and Spain restructures their country properly. But the volatility, you can't be a CMBS lender because what happens is everything gets compressed and then you're going to bail out and you're going to lose money. So unfortunately, we could be looking at a few years of volatility in the lending market, and so that could have an impact. And of course, now that it looks like the super committee will not reach an agreement on reducing the deficit, you have consumer confidence down to a very low number, probably the lowest in 40 years, 39%, other than the 2008 recession. So we do have issues that are coming up in the next 2 years.
Do you see opportunities to buy poor, bad retailers or distressed debt? I mean, in 2012?
Well, you're answering your own question about what 2012 is going to look like. So here we are towards the end of 2011, and we're all concerned about the disasters that could happen due to Europe. So for those of us who run operating businesses, I promise you we're not making bold and adventurous investments, capital expenditures. We're nervous. We think it's going to be all right. It feels all right, but we're going to slow it down. We're not going to rent new office. We're not going to open up a lot of new stores. We're not going to start a whole lot new because the world could end. So I think 12 is going to be, in the best case scenario, it's going to be very slow and very flat, because here we are at the end of 11, and if you can talk to operating CEO after operating CEO, and they're all going to tell you the same thing, they're cutting expenses or keeping expenses very tight, and they're keeping their money in their pocket.
But the corporate balance sheets are still very strong today, and corporate profits are up 53% from last year.
Yeah, but they're not running out to spend the money because they're concerned the world's going to blow up.
We have one healthy thing that's happening in the property business. What went on in 05 and 06 with big players or little players buying property on a Monday and selling it on a Tuesday is over. That just doesn't happen anymore. Wasn't healthy, sent a bad message. The speculation was out of control. Now, even our job is to have a 3 to 5 year business plan. It's not to buy something and flip it quickly. So that means that you have to bring the forces in order to improve properties, make equity, and really do, as all of us used to do, real work. And that's going on in this country.
Yeah.
So people have plans. They don't buy something that's in Malibu, which they think the next person will buy because it's really sexy. They have to do something with those properties in a Malibu that they're buying. So just like Richard did in Lord & Taylor and the Bay, he improved it. He brought in better brands, better people. It wasn't just, okay, I bought an iconic name like Lord & Taylor, somebody else will buy it. So all of us, every day in our work, are improving what we're involved with.
This year, 2011 was the 20th anniversary of a number of REITs. It was Kimco's 20th anniversary. It was the creation of lots of REITs. Jim, you and Bernie, had a company which you basically
Sold to Vornado.
sold to Vornado. Do we see companies today being acquired by REITs? One question. And do we see companies today going public? Do we see new banks? I mean, where do you see 2012 in the future of, do we see that again?
I think you will see REITs. I wouldn't be surprised, and I have no knowledge, I wouldn't be surprised if Scott Reckler becomes a REIT. He was there once before. I think there's a few other people out there that could do that. I think the securitization of both debt and equity was a good thing for the country. The problem is it was abused in the CMBS market to some extent, but I still believe the future of real estate is in the public markets. And I think that you see that all over the world. Maybe the timing was wrong, but you have REITs in Japan, you have REITs in many countries. And I think that that's a good form of ownership because it's a checks and balances on the real estate market. You have analysts that are not stupid, and the market tells you what the property and what the company is worth. So I do see more REITs over time, but you still have to get past this volatility because nothing gets done when the financial markets are in stress.
Richard?
Yeah, I see in 2012 very little happening because there's no movement. You can't buy properties. You can't create new REITs unless you can buy properties. There's not the CMBS debt to the extent that we hoped it would be. I think you're going to see a very flat, stalled, positive moving direction next year.
Lee?
Well, for us, our business is still to create product that we sell to REITs or we sell to those types of core investors. I see that continuing to happen. I think there'll still be a lot of opportunity to buy, fix, and sell. I don't think there's going to be an opportunity to make a whole lot of money in other property business because there's really a whole lot of perfect information there and things that we buy seem to be priced properly. There are little or no steals of stuff that's income producing. So I think it's a time to really be risk averse, and that's what we intend to do.
Do you see banks being acquired in 2012?
Oh, yeah.
Do you see new bankers? I mean, everyone says that Mr. Canis is back in New York with Bank United, you know, with his acquisition of Herald, if it takes place, and other things. Do you see consolidation in the banking world in 2012?
Throughout the country, for sure. New York far less than the rest of the country, but we lent more money in 11 than we've ever lent, and we'll lend more money in 12 than we lent in 11. And during cycle turns, we actually lend more money.
Right.
And the way you do business is the way we lend. So we lend to people that are actually building value based on a cash flow or rent roll, rather than people that are flipping at market real estate. So at market will collapse, which will create the opportunity
Right.
for the appropriate buyers. So even in a difficult time, New York represents a great place to be, because if you're buying right, you're going to make money on it no matter what.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that regardless of what happens in the world today, New York City, I think, is going to reach another level of success in the real estate market, in the new media and technology market, in the tourism market, and I think with this whole idea of bringing Stanford and NYU Poly and Cornell, I'm very optimistic about New York. I'm not suggesting that returns are going to be through the roof, but I think that there's not a better stable place with less downside than New York.
One quick question for you, Richard. In Lord & Taylor in Manhattan, in your flagship store, how much of the consumers are out-of-towners or foreigners, and how many are domestic?
Yeah, it's a good question. We definitely have a larger percentage than we used to of international travelers coming through the store, but not to the same extent that you would see at a Saks, for example. So, maybe 7-8% of our customers are international when it used to be 4 or 5. So we definitely see that.
So with 30 seconds left, just give me a quick bite on 2012. Good year, bad year, fair year?
Good year, but with a lot of
Cautious optimism?
no, not cautious optimism. I think it's going to be a good year in New York, good year in San Francisco and Silicon Valley, and maybe not as great around the country.
I think it'll be fine for people who control their own destiny.
I think the major markets will be just fine. I'm worried that the suburbs, the secondary and the tertiary markets will absolutely collapse.
Joseph?
The volatility will affect the nation and the world, but as you've all said, New York's going to do fine.
I'd like to thank Joe Ficalora, Lee Nygaard, Richard Baker, and Jim Kuhn. See you next week.